we said it at the beginning.
Done, we are recording now.
Okay, good morning, everybody. We are about to start our webinar about Geoportal and the results of the monitoring 2019 exercise. My name is Robert Thomas, and I will be the chair of the webinar today. First of all, a little housekeeping information. Please, as it is written in the slide, mute your microphone and turn off your video. If you want to ask some questions, use the chat box to write your questions. With raising your hand, it might be difficult because I don't see at this, because I'm sharing the presentation, I don't see these things. So, but I will be helped by my colleagues. So maybe they can inform me that somebody wants to jump in. But in any way, I would encourage you to keep your questions till the end, because we will hopefully have some time for some questions at the end. As you know, we were planning a normal face-to-face Geoportal workshop as we had 2 years ago, which was very successful, 2-day meeting. I think this time it would be even more useful because we have this huge experience with the exercise of processing your metadata and also use of the reference validator. So unfortunately, until now, this not happened. So this webinar is a kind of a substitute of this activity, but I think that, or I hope that the workshop should still take place in the coming months, maybe as a preparation for the next year monitoring exercise. So I will start now the presentation. So here is a little program that we prepared for you together with my colleagues. So I will start with basically summarizing the monitoring process and the results. Then it will be followed by Marco by giving you more details on the use of the reference validator, which was for the first time used for validating your metadata and calculating the respective indicators. Then there will be a short update on the country fishes by Vlado. Then we will have a short intervention by Daniele Francioli, who is managing the help desk, and he will tell you a little bit about that. Then we have prepared a few slides about where we're going with the Geoportal and the kind of preparation for the monitoring to 2020. In the last part, we have also prepared a summary of your responses to the survey that we received from you. And I think that that summary could lead us to a nice discussion, or maybe by the time your potential questions might be already answered. And I would hope for that. So let me start with the monitoring 2019. So first of all, I have to highlight what was communicated by our colleague from DG Environment. It's been, or it is, a transitional year. So we have a new decision which is changing the way the monitoring was done in the past. We have new set of indicators. Some of them are the same, but there are some new ones. We also, for the first time, bringing these indicators and its calculation really close to the Geoportal appearance. So it not as it was before, where there was a system that you provided information which was detached from the reality of the European Geoportal. Then, for the first time in the decision, in the Commission decision, the use of reference validator is written and promoted. So that was a really massive exercise on our side to validate your metadata. And then I would like to say that the whole activity was carried out in a joint kind of environment where we were coordinating and working on it, but with a big help from your side, especially from the subgroup on monitoring and reporting, and the help from the MIC team members, and as well as the national catalog administrators. So a little, let's say, summary of the process. So there were basically 3 stages that we identified. So there was a very short preparatory phase. So taking into account the adoption of the decision, which was in August last year. So basically we have something like less than 2 months to prepare this system. Then we collected your metadata as a kind of a snapshot to then continue processing your data and calculating the indicators. That happened around the end of the year, as it is required by the decision. Then, since the beginning of January, basically till 15th of April, we have been processing, validating, and calculating, and repeating, and bug fixing, etc. The systems as well as the indicators. And then in that period, we also publish a website where we were informing you about the results. So it was a kind of a website, or it is kind of a website as a kind of dashboard where we try to provide all necessary information for you, as well as the documentation of errors that we found, and as a potential base for the discussions with us. Also, during that period, the reference validator software has been updated several times. Some of these new releases is really directly responding to the activity on monitoring 2019. Okay, so first of all, let me show you a little bit the workflow that we had to do. So originally, we were planning just to harvest your catalogs as we are used to, using the backend of the Geoportal. Unfortunately, we discovered that the system was not ready for such a massive exercise, and we were having really massive issues with getting your metadata to us and processing them in a successful manner. So we were a little bit desperate at that moment, so we had to split that process into 2, basically. First, getting your metadata to our site. That was the kind of metadata download that we performed without any processing, without any calculation. Then once your data were stored in our system, then we install a GeoNetwork instance in our place, and we uploaded your catalogs in our instance of GeoNetwork. And then basically in our pace, according to the availability of hardware and software in our site, we started slowly to basically process your metadata and calculate the indicators. Okay, so this is basically expressed in these slides. Okay, so once the indicators have been calculated, then we publish them in the indicator dashboard website. Of course, for the indicators related to the results of the metadata validation, the data was pushed to the reference validator. Then, of course, we knew that the validator scripts are not prepared in a bulk mode, so we had to develop a script that would be able to basically run the validation for the total endpoint. We did that, and then the results of the validation we then basically copied to the indicator dashboard to complete the set of indicators. So that was shortly the process that we had to do. Of course, in the process there were several rounds of iterations with you. As we were publishing the results, of course, you had your understanding and your information about your data. So therefore, it created these interactions, which was very useful because in many cases we had some issues on our sides. In other situations, it was on your side with your metadata. So let me now go slowly to the results. So basically here is a little summary of the data that we've collected. So we have harvested 35 metadata catalogs that are registered in our system. We have 32 national catalogs and 3 regional ones. In total, we have something like there are 160,000 metadata of datasets, 3,000 metadata of dataset series, and around 100,000 metadata of the spatial data services. In total, the reference validator was used to validate over 260,000 records. And here are the screenshots of this dashboard that we prepared, which is still open and can be still used because we have published some useful, according to us, documentations about the errors that we found or the validator found, and for you to look at it and to possibly improve the performance of your metadata of your resources. Here is the summary of the distribution of the metadata of the data sets across countries. As you can see, basically we have two categories of catalogs. Clearly, we have the catalogs. The majority of countries are providing catalogs with roughly below 1,000 records, and now I'm combining all the 3 types of metadata resources, dataset series services. And then we have 5 countries where their catalogs are having more than 20,000 up to 100,000 records. So you can see that there is a big variety between the catalogs, which also have an impact on the processing, harvesting, and the tools available and their stability. Here is the distribution of the metadata of the services, just to complete the picture. Also, this picture clearly shows that there is a kind of a national way of organizing data for distribution. So in our countries, there are less services that are providing more data sets, whereas there are countries where the services almost equal the data set, so 1 service per data set. On this slide, we have prepared the availability of data sets according to the spatial scope, so which of the data sets are national or regional, and the others, so mainly the local ones. So here you can see again that the differences between countries Clearly, there is a national strategies going on in many countries to provide the aggregated, hopefully quality assured national or regional data sets, like in Austria, Netherlands, Sweden, Luxembourg. And there are countries where, they are providing basically mainly the local data sets, like in the case of Portugal or France, Poland. You can nicely see it from this chart. Here is the distribution by inspired teams, and I think what is really striking from immediately is this peak on the land use team, and that is because there are many spatial uh, local spatial um, data sets provided, spatial management data sets provided, which creates this very big peak, which of course is influencing all the statistics. So if we cut these data sets of the spatial local planning, then the overall numbers would drop down, I would say, quite a lot. So we have to take into account when seeing the overall numbers, of course. This is availability of the data sets. And when I say availability, I'm talking about metadata. I'm not talking about downloadable, viewable. This is only the metadata kind of part. So the indicator DSI 1.3, and before it was DSI 1112 and 1415. So the first category. Here you can see that in total, around the end of the year, we had 1,660 metadata of priority data sets registered. And from this chart, you can see the distribution by the environmental domains. And it is clear that the water and noise directive related data sets are the most common or are most provided. Okay, now a little bit about the conformity, but I will not go in too much detail because there will be a dedicated presentation after me by Marco. He will show similar slides. So here is just a distribution of the overall conformity of metadata by countries. You can see the big differences. So there are countries with a very good conformity, but there are countries with very low conformity. So of course that this difference is influencing the statistics of the aggregated information. You have to take this into account. Here is the overall conformity percentage. So regarding the dataset and series, we are around 35%. And regarding the services metadata, we are slightly higher, reaching almost 40%. In overall, it is a very low percentage of conformity. We were not expecting such a low conformity, and of course, you can imagine that based on these statistics, you would agree with us that basically harvesting and processing of your metadata is really very specific, almost endpoint by endpoint, and that really created a lot of specific issues on our side and your side with the whole processing of this exercise. So it is not really adding the smoothness of the process if the conformity of your metadata is not higher. Here is also the estimation of the technical guidance 1.3 and 1.2.0 for the metadata. So basically the encoding of your metadata according to the requirements of those two guidelines, and clearly the majority of the metadata are still with the 1.3 technical guidelines. I will leave it with that because Marco will speak much more about that. Here is the overall conformity of the data sets of the data sets, so the interoperability and the network services. So here it is a self-declaration that we have been checking, and as you can see, basically it is split also by the annexes and the overall. So we are roughly around 40% for the data set conformity, and almost at the same level for the network services. Again, we are talking about self-declaration here. We are not checking those things yet, but what is really striking is the level for Annex 1. So the data set conformity or the interoperability regulation should have been done since the 2018, so 2 years ago basically, and we are at this moment at the level of 56% of conformity. Just to pick up one aspect from these slides. Here we put the kind of overall conformity of your resources, and as you can see, they are basically oscillating between 35 to 40%. Now let's move to the accessibility. So the real accessibility from the user perspective, so what they can view, what they can download. Here is the graph that shows that in overall we have out of 160,000 data sets described by metadata, we have roughly 1/3 of those available either through view service or download service. So here is the distribution chart. Also, you can see that there are roughly 14,000 data sets for which we have or the user can enjoy the view service, and they can also download the data sets. So as you can see, the gap between the overall number of registered data sets, let's call it like this, and the possibility to really view and download is still very big. Here is the same, but distributed by countries. So the yellow columns are the overall metadata, and the green and blue are the viewable and downloadable data sets. So you can see clearly that for some countries, the difference between the metadata and of data sets and the data sets that actually can be viewed and download is really very big. For some countries, on the other hand, it is quite equal, which is exactly what I think we all want to see. And just to pick the Austria or Belgium or Luxembourg, Netherlands as good examples. Here is the accessibility of data sets divided by Inspire teams. And I think you can see the Annex 1 data, which are, let's say, the reference geospatial data sets. I would say the priority of priority for Inspire, and you can see, really a striking problems there. So if you look at, for instance, the cadastre parcels, there are almost 13,000 metadata, which that is fine, but only 30 data sets are downloadable. And again, we are talking about 2020, and the obligation is there since more than 2 years for that. Of course, that in case of addresses and administrative units team, we have to take into account the national aggregation. So usually there is one data set, one downloadable data set that is providing the administrative unit for the countries or for the region. So, the organization of data and national aggregation, this has to be taken into account. But in case of cadastre parcels, I think this is really a striking, I would say, problem. If we go to Annex 3, I think there is nothing really striking here, apart from the difference between metadata and the viewable or downloadable data sets. Again, On the right side, there is this, let's say, anomaly of the local planning data that is, we put it as a category aside. I already mentioned about that. Okay, now I have two more slides about the results. So this one is what we call the best of. The best of regarding the users, because probably the users having in mind, let's say, cross-country or even pan-European use cases, they would like to see what are the national data sets, ideally what are the pan-European data sets, and which of those are downloadable and viewable. And here you have that combination of parameters expressed in these graphs. Okay, so again, this reflects the aggregation policy or the strategy at the national level to provide the national, regional versus the local data, of course. But I think it gives a picture of from let's say from the user perspective what they can really get immediately from the Inspire Geoportal. And here is a similar best of regarding the priority data sets. Again, so here we talk about national or regional ones only, and which are downloadable or viewable. And you can see nicely the peaks around the water framework directive related data sets and noise directive related data sets, followed by the floods directive. That's the 2007/60 EC directive in the picture. Okay, so that was a short overview of the results. We are preparing the technical report where we will put the majority of these graphs, and also we would explain and we would put some context to each of those, and that report should be published, let's say, in the summertime of this year. So, what are the lessons learned from the process? So. It is clear that the preparatory phase for such a system that is integrating the several systems together was very short. I would say too short. I already mentioned the low level of conformity of metadata, which didn't help with the process. It is clearly showing that the use of the reference validator before this process started was very low. And we also notice clearly that the stability of your services really needs to be more robust and needs to improve. I mentioned also that the data accessibility, so the data sets that can be viewed and download, is still very low. So we are still at the level of 1/3 of the total number of registered data sets. And there is a clear gap still between, if you think that we have 100,000 metadata of services, and then we only have, let's say, 1/3 of those available, the data sets available, so there is a clear gap. And so what are the reasons for those services not to providing the data set? So I think that we can all agree that these are the three major issues. So still the issue with the linkages. So you have services that are incorrectly linked with the data sets metadata, or the other way around. Then there is a portion of services that are behind the protection layers. We already talked about that. And newly, or not newly, but it was clearly demonstrated in the process of processing your data and validating, the stability of your services is really not ideal. And that, of course, reflects the results, because we had to take the results from a certain moment. And if the service was down, unfortunately, we had to take as a bad information. So, what are the, let's say, more positive lessons? So I think that during the whole process, there was overall a very positive interaction with you. I think that both sides understood that we are learning, and also on your side, we understood that you were learning a bit. So I think that the mutual, let's say, environment was very positive. I think that we have improved both systems quite a lot. I'm talking about the backend of the Geoportal in terms of making it more flexible and more robust, as well as the improvement on the side of reference validator, which I believe has become a really useful tool now to be used. Then the introduction of the new keywords from the user perspective clearly helped to see the potential of Inspire as a whole, so to see the national data sets clearly from the local ones. I'm not saying that local ones are not important, but of course there are different use cases for both. Then, and I think that's probably the most important, what we believe, and that's why we invested a lot of effort. We believe that we have set up some kind of a reliable reference line or baseline for the status of the infrastructure, towards which, in the coming months, we can refer to and we can see the progress against. So I think this is a very useful. This is why we see that exercise and the investment of our resources in this as a useful thing. And of course, we believe that with the experience on both sides, the next monitoring exercise will be much more smoother and hopefully will give us better results. Okay, and with this I would finish at this moment, and I would give the floor to Marco to give you a little bit more detail on the use of the reference validator.
Thanks, Robert, and good morning, everyone. I think I just need to get the presenter role to be able to share my screen.
Yeah, I'm passing it to you, Marco.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Daniele. Let me turn on the video also. Okay. Okay, and let me share the screen. Okay, can you see the slides?
Yes.
Okay, good. So again, good morning, everyone. And yeah, as Robert said, in this presentation, I will just focus on the role of the reference validator in the monitoring exercise. I will explain what we did, how we did, and also what we really learned from the process. Again, this was clearly a joint work, and I would like to thank all the colleagues from the Geoportal and also the validation team that are mentioned here. So, okay. So as you know very well, the validator was used to calculate 2 out of the 19 indicators. This is just a screenshot of the implementing decision for monitoring and reporting. The 2 indicators, as you know very well, are MDI11 and MDI12. Let's just come to a little bit more detail about each of them. So the first one, MDI11, is the percentage of conformant metadata for spatial datasets and dataset series. On the right, you can see the interface of the reference validator, and you can see basically which test, or better, which conformance classes we used to compute it. In that case, for MDI11, the way that we distinguished metadata 1.3 and 2.0 was basically the same. So you can see that basically, as you know very well, we just looked at the MD scope code element, and in particular at the code list value. So if it was dataset or series, of course, we classified that metadata as a dataset metadata, and we validated it as you see on the right-hand side of the slide. So metadata 1.3 is the conformance class marked in red, and for metadata 2.0, the two conformance classes highlighted in green here. For MDI 1.2, we used a slightly different approach to filter basically the services, in this case for metadata TG 1.3 and 2.0. So this indicator is the percentage of conformant metadata for services. So for TG 1.3, we just looked again at the scope code element, and we filtered those with a code list value equal to service, and the conformance class we used was the same as before. For TG 2.0, the situation is a bit different, because here, in addition to classifying and to extracting those metadata with a service code list value, we also distinguish between the network services and the invocable spatial data services by looking at the value of the local name attribute of the metadata. If we found a view, download, discovery, or transformation value, then we classified it as a network service. If we found the other value, then we classified it as an invocable spatial data service. And according to this last classification, we use slightly different conformance classes. In green, you see those for network services. In yellow, those for invocable spatial data services. Basically, the only difference is that in the first case, we used conformance class 4, that was on network service metadata, in addition to conformance class 3 and the common requirements. In the second case, we use conformance class 5 on the invocable spatial data service metadata. I have to say that we had a total of 100 spatial data services, so 100 out of 260,000. So they were really a minority, but there were some. Okay, and here, as you know very well, this is the portion of the monitoring dashboard. I just took one random country here just to show you what and how are how the results of the validation and the indicators related to validations are presented. So starting from the top, in red you have the total number of metadata. On the left for data sets and series, on the right for spatial data services, and in green you have the estimated TG version. I will come in a minute to the reason of this estimated word here. So on the left for datasets and series, on the right for services. Then in blue here you can see the information about the conformity of metadata in absolute terms, so not as a percentage. Again, on the left for dataset and dataset series metadata, and on the right for service metadata. Then in brown, you have a list of supplementary materials that we decided to provide. So basically, these are files that you can download, and I will have some separate slides later on this supplementary material. So I will not say anything now about that. And finally, you have the two values of the indicators that are the percentages, as we discussed before. So one thing that, of course, I didn't explicitly say, but was clear from my previous slides, was that even before starting the validation, we had to classify metadata according to the TG version. In a first step, we did that by just looking at the element, the only element that is different between the encoding of TG 1.3 and TG 2.0. That is the GMD use limitation element. This element is mandatory for TG 1.3 because it should be used to encode the element conditions applying to access and use, but it's not mandatory in 2.0, so it shouldn't be found in 2.0. So that was our first classification filter criterion. But then after a while looking at your metadata, we discovered that in some cases, this element was also used in metadata TG 2.0. And you can see a clear example here. You can recognize the two blocks, the red and the green one, for limitations on public access and conditions applying to access and use, which are two typical blocks of metadata 2.0. But you can see in the blue rectangle that in that case, also the use limitation element was used. So that was a clear example of metadata 2.0 with the addition of these elements. Clearly, it is possible to use that element, so this metadata would not fail validation. Of course, it is a metadata 2.0, although our initial idea was really to use that element. If you ask me why this happens, I can say that there might be different reasons. In some cases, clearly we saw some cases of metadata that maybe were 1.3 in the past, and they have been, let's say, moved to 2.0. In other cases, we know that this element, the use limitation, has a specific meaning. So it is used for one specific aim at the national level. So it has another, let's say, usefulness. But anyway, whatever is the reason, this case actually happens. So at the end, we came up with an automated workflow to estimate the TG version and to validate the metadata. Instead of really looking at this slide that has a lot of text, I would prefer to drive you through this process here. I hope you can see my cursor. So just follow it, just to really understand what we did. So let's start from a metadata record, because we applied this procedure independently on each metadata that we harvested. And let's suppose in this example that there is a metadata and there is also this use limitation element included. So the first thing we did was to apply our filter based on the use limitation element to classify the TG version. Suppose that there is this element, so we classified it initially as 1.3, and then we validated it against the conformance class of 1.3. And then we looked at whether the test was passed or not. If it was, then we stopped and we said, okay, that metadata was actually 1.3 in that example. If it didn't pass, then we also try to validate against the other TG version. So in this case, against 2.0. And we looked at the outcome of the test. If the test was passed, then we said, okay, let's change our classification. This is a 2.0. If the test was not passed, then we decide to come back to our initial classification. So in that case, we still classify the metadata as 1.3. So basically here, there is only one or basically two cases that this procedure is not able to really understand, to identify. And these are the cases of a metadata 2.0, basically with the use limitation element. Because there might be some cases where in the intention of the data provider, that metadata was a 2.0, but it passes validation against 1.3. It is rare, but it might happen in principle. And also the case where the metadata was in the intention of the data provider at 2.0, but it includes the use limitation element. It doesn't pass both the validation, so it doesn't pass 1.3, it doesn't pass 2.0, and it is estimated as 1.3. And so we cannot really get that this was in the intention of the data provider at 2.0. So in summary, we cannot, in the sense that it is not possible really to know what was the intention of the data provider. And this is the reason why this is really only an estimation. But what is important in this context, in the monitoring frame, is that this absolutely has no influence on the calculation of the indicators, because in any case, we validated a metadata that was not passing the first validation also against the second, the conformance classes of the second technical guidance. So in any case, if we classified one of your metadata as not conformant, it means that we validated against both the conformance classes. So basically, the estimation of the TG, in other words, does not impact the values of the indicators. Okay, now let's come to the results, and let's start from global results. So these are the same that Robert already showed, but I wanted to really show them again to highlight one specific or two specific aspects. The first is actually to give you an idea of the amount of resources that we had and that we had to process, not only with the Geoportal, but also with the validator. Of course, we use the API clearly to automate our processing. I didn't say at the beginning, but it's obvious. And then in terms of total or global conformity of the metadata, as Robert already showed, the values are around 35, 36%, slightly lower for datasets, slightly higher for services. What I want to add here is that these are, once again, global results. And these global results are highly biased by the countries having most of the metadata. Robert has very clearly shown that we have 5 countries with tens of thousands of metadata, while most of the countries have only some tens or some hundreds of metadata. Of course, the conformity of the metadata of the big countries impacts a lot on these big numbers. That's why it's very, very good also to take a look at the country-specific results. And I would start from the right-hand side spider graph, where basically you see all the countries around the circle and all the dots inside. So each country has 2 dots. The closer these are to the external boundary of the circle, let's say the higher the performance, the combined performance of each country for the 2 indicators, MDI 1.1 and MDI 1.2. So from here, you can already see that there are some countries performing well in both the indicators. There are some countries performing low in both the indicators. And there are also some countries, for example, this one that is Romania, performing very well in one and very low in the other one. If we look on the left, that is basically the separate plots for the 2 indicators, you can really understand how the situation is very, very heterogeneous across countries. In particular, for both the indicators, there are countries with a value of 0%, and there is one country that is Greece with a value of 100%. What is important is that, again, the heterogeneity is very, very high, and this is given by the values of the standard deviation. You see the mean is 36 and 39% in the 2 indicators, but the standard deviation is also very, very high. It is comparable with the mean. So once again, we know from basic statistics that we should never look at the mean without the standard deviation. And this is a very clear example of why we shouldn't do that, because here the high standard deviation really tells us how variable are the results if we look at the country-specific situation. Here, instead, we looked at the estimation of the technical guidance version of the metadata. Again, it was an estimation, but again, we can see the difference between the global and the country-specific results. So looking at the global results and looking, for example, at the last column here, the overall situation is quite clear. So 97% is 1.3, 3% is 2.0, slight differences for data sets and services, but that's the global picture. If we look at country-specific results, again, it's clear that most of the countries are still using 1.3. Half of the countries are only using 1.3, but there are also some countries using 2.0. Again, only one country, that is Greece, with 100% of metadata 2.0. Now, let's come to the supplementary material that we provided. First of all, I want to say that this was an additional big effort that we did, but we believe that it was worth doing that in order to really provide something useful and helpful for you to really allow you to assess the result and to improve your metadata for the next months and for the next round of the monitoring in particular. So what did we provide you? Basically 3 different files marked also in the screenshot here. The first was actually 2 zip files. So you see number 2 here and number 2 here. So 2 zip files, including the the test reports for the failed metadata for datasets and for services. And we provided that as HTML and JSON inside the zip files, but I will explain later on in more detail. And then number 2 is basically a summary of the errors for all the metadata that failed validation for your specific endpoint. So basically for each endpoint. And we provided that as a CSV. And then number 3 was the summary of errors for all the metadata failing the validation in all the endpoints taken together. And that was an Excel file. I just anticipate something that Robert will also present later on, but in the survey that we did over the last weeks, basically most of you rated this supplementary material as very useful. It was basically a scale from 1 to 4, where 4 was very useful. So you rated it at basically 58%, which means 3 out of 5 countries rated it as very useful. And we are particularly happy about that. The other countries actually rated it as somewhat useful. So also very positive, I would say. Okay, so let's maybe try to have a look at each of these files and I will try to really guide you through a hypothetical workflow to really assess the errors and fix the metadata. The first thing you should do is to look at the test reports and download the zip files and of course unzip them, and you will find something like this. So you will find a series of HTML and JSON files. Basically for each metadata you will find 4 files. Why 4 files? Because if you remember, each failed metadata is a metadata that failed both the validations against 1.3 and 2.0. So you basically have the 2 tests, but for each, 2 test reports. For each test report, you have basically the HTML, that is a human readable test report, and also the JSON, which is a machine readable version of the test report. So that's why you have 4 files, basically with the same name, with the difference of .1 for the second TG version that was tested, and then different extension. Let's, for example, take this one as an example. So the name is 1-100_5, and let's take the HTML. That is the one you see here. So basically, this is how the test report looks like. In this case, it's a 1.3 metadata. There are 2 conformance classes, and here you see that there were 2 tests failed. One for the first conformance class and one for the second conformance class. Then you should also look at the CSV file. That was basically the file providing the summary of validation error for your specific endpoint. In this file, each row is a different metadata. So you should really scroll down the file and look for the metadata that you are interested in. In our example, you can look either for the file name, okay, or for the file identifier. The file identifier appears also in the test report, as you can see from my cursor here. So this CSV file provides you the TG version, estimated of course, the type, dataset or service, the number, the total number of errors, in this case 2, which confirms basically what the test report already tells, and then also the ID of the test or the test assertions that failed. I will come later to this concept. Then, of course, to fix the metadata, you will need to find the metadata. It's important to say that we decided not to provide back the metadata. We only provided the test reports because you already have the metadata. And of course, that was a bit obvious, but let me tell it, we didn't provide the test reports for the past metadata, of course, because we would have really overloaded our server with kind of useless information. So we decided only to provide the failed test reports. So to find the metadata, you again have to look for the file identifier. And the file identifier, again, appears in the test report and appears also in the CSV file. And the final step is, of course, to fix the metadata record based on the error message in the test report. So the suggestion is read the test report, because the error message already tells you what the error is or what the errors might be. In some cases, maybe the error message is not 100% sufficient to really explain what the error might be. And in this case, our suggestion is also to look at the ATS, so the abstract test suite, and optionally also the ETS, to really understand what the validator is checking. That would clarify probably all your doubts if you have any. And finally, this is the last file we provided. It is the Excel file providing a summary of all the errors for all the endpoints. Let me briefly present how this is structured. It has 6 sheets. You can see here at the bottom. The first 3 are for 1.3. The second 3 are for 2.0. Here we are looking at the first sheet for 1.3, that is a README file. And here it is where each test or test assertion is basically explained, because you have the ID, so the one that appeared in the CSV, the title of the test, and the link to the ATS. So from here, you can really understand what the test is about. So you have the ID and you have the ATS. Then this is one of the other sheets. For example, this is the one for services of metadata 1.3. And basically, you have each endpoint in each row of this table and all the tests in the columns. So why is this file very, very important and very useful in our opinion, at least? Because it gives you the total number of metadata that failed each test. Let's take just one example, just to clarify why this is useful. And let me take the example of Hungary. You see that Hungary is this row, so 34 metadata failed. Usually what happens, and you can easily see it in this table, is that the errors in the metadata are not distributed across all the tests, but typically they are very, very concentrated and only happen for some tests. The case of Hungary is very clear in this sense. So Hungary has errors only for this test, this test, this test, and this test. So basically, and this. So only few tests. It means that probably the errors are the same in all the metadata or in many of the metadata. And this also means that probably fixing those metadata is not a big effort because you have to do the very same fix in all of them. So that is one of the reasons why we really wanted to help you providing these files. Okay, as Robert already mentioned, we really packed all these processing, so not just the validation, but also the estimation of the version of the metadata, the storage of the outputs, the calculation of the indicators, and so on, using clearly an ETL platform that is PDI, Pentaho Data Integration. We are going to publish very, very soon. We are really finalizing the last checks. We are publishing these scripts under an open source license, and we will put there in the Inspire validation space on GitHub. And so in order to share it with you, again, these scripts will be very useful or should be very useful in order to allow you first to replicate the validation process that we performed. Of course, keep in mind that we did it on your resources available in December last year. So if you do it now, you will probably get different results, or you might get different results, but also in order to customize the process according to your needs. Suppose that you want to validate metadata using your own instance of the validator. You want to validate only a portion of the metadata, for example, those from one single data provider, and so on. Okay, and then we will also share with you another script, so basically an updated version of this script that will include the tests to be applied in the next monitoring round. So as soon as this is defined, we will also share with you an updated version of that script to really help you test and prepare your resources in advance. Some conclusions. Again, I want to echo what Robert has already said in terms of the metadata conformity. Overall, it was quite low. But again, we should not just look at the global result, which is a bit negative, but we should also look at the country-specific situation that was very, very heterogeneous. It's clear that many data providers or many metadata, let's say, creators did not really use the reference validator, or not so much. There were a lot of different errors, again, maybe very specific for data providers. So there is a lot of space for improvement in this sense. High percentage of metadata TG 1.3. And as mentioned already by Robert, then I also want to really say something positive as well. It was a very useful exercise for us because it was the very first time we looked at the resources, at the metadata records from the member states. These allowed to really discover how you are really implementing the TG, how you are encoding the different elements, and how different are the implementations. We discovered a lot of corner cases, and these allow to discover and to fix also bugs in the validator, but also to improve the validator in terms of stability and performance. Maybe some of you has noticed that before the monitoring exercise, validation of one single metadata took about 40 seconds. Now it takes about 5 seconds. So this was a very huge improvement that we did, and of course that will help in the future as well. And also this allowed to identify some inconsistencies with the Geoportal, and also to identify bugs, let's say, in the Geoportal indirectly through the validator. Finally, a very important recommendation, please, for your tests, set up and use your own instance of the validator. Why? Of course, it's no problem if you use the central instance of the validator to test one or to test a small set of metadata. That's absolutely not a problem. But imagine what might happen if all the member states will validate massively thousands of metadata, maybe every day or every week, all at the same time. So the validator will really crash. So it's not meant to be used in this way. So a recommendation is again to set up and to run your own instance of the validator. I will just close with some flash news on the validator. We released a plan already some months ago with basically a roadmap of the next releases. This basically tells when we are going to release an update, so a new version of the validator, and what kind of release that will be. I just want to mention that the next one will be in 2 weeks, so in mid-June, and then we will have another one in mid-September before the December deadline. But the good news is that we decided that after the June release, we will not make any test stricter. So it means that after the June release, and in particular in the September release, we will only relax tests in order really to give you some more time to prepare to the next monitoring round. So in other words, this means that if you have a metadata that passes validation after the June release, it will also pass validation in December. Then we also published a description of the help desk management workflow to help the community interact with the help desk. I really suggest you to give a look at both these documents. And also good news is that in a few weeks, let's say in a few months, to be on the safe side, you will see a totally restyled UI of the validator. So we are working on a new Inspire specific interface of the validator that will hopefully also make the interaction with the validator a bit easier. Then about the validator, I will not say anything more because we will have a dedicated webinar next week, again, within the Inspire conference. So I invite you all to come, but also to invite to this webinar both your data providers, so those that are actually producing the metadata, no matter if they have never used the validator. There will be also a part for beginners in this webinar, but also to invite the maintainers, the technical responsible of your geoportals and your validators, because we will also show in this webinar how to set up and how to deploy of the validator. And with this, I have really closed. So I think the questions are kept for the end of the webinar.
Thank you very much, Marco. I think it was a very comprehensive presentation how we use the validator, and I really would recommend you to have a look on the slides afterwards as well, especially for the part of the how we explain the possible use or intended use of the error documentation that we provided to help you to find the errors and quickly and to improve it. I think so. The presentations will be available, so please have a look. If you have any questions, of course, you can always contact Marco or the GRC Geoportal team. It's very difficult to keep the time during these online webinars. I didn't want to interrupt Marco, but we are a little bit late now. So the next short presentation will be, or information will be provided by Vlado about the update of the country fishes. Vlado, should I share the presentation? I copied your slide there.
Well, you can, but I would also like to show on the Inspire knowledge base. So if you can, but please, you can do it so that I don't need to share.
Okay, so I need to be host. So Daniela, can you make me host so that I can share?
Presenter.
Sorry. Yeah, sorry. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay, Vlado, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you, Robert. So basically, it's a very short presentation. If you can just click on the next slide. It's basically just one slide with the updates on the country fishes. So basically the system for the updating of the country fishes was opened beginning of the March, and it was supposed to be closed end of March, but we decided to extend it because of all this crisis with Corona till the end of April. And in that timeline, we received a lot of updates from the member states, but also from some EFTA countries. After that, basically, we started to do the visualization for the calculated indicators, which you will see on one example. Basically, we visualize the indicators and we added all this visualization to the respective country fishes, and it was done mid of April. After that, basically, we published all the country fishes in the Inspire knowledge base. It is in the section Inspire in your country. And basically, there are two versions provided, HTML, but also PDF version, which could be then downloaded for the further reuse. Still, there are still discussions ongoing for the archiving of the monitoring and reporting in the ReportNet with the agency, and we will fine-tune it in the near future. So if you can click, maybe Robert, on the link and just let's see one maybe example. So basically here, Inspire in your country, you can choose any country that you want. Let's see, Austria maybe, for example. So basically, you will see if you scroll down. Yeah, so for the 2020, we have these two versions, PDF and HTML. If you click on HTML, maybe we can just take a quick look how it looks like. So basically, this is the country fish with the standard parts, starting from introduction, state of play, and so on and so on. And basically, at the end, we added those visualization of indicators. They are very simple this year. Just simple, let's say, bar graphs. But as Robert already pointed before, I think we got this year basically a good baseline, so that for the next year monitoring, we will be able really then to basically follow the progress and to see kind of a trends and so on and so on. So these are really, let's say, the first visualization of indicators based on the new decision, which serves now as a baseline for the future monitoring. So basically, that would be a short update on country fishes from my side. Thank you. I think, Robert, you are muted if you want to continue.
I'm sorry, I was talking to myself.
Okay.
Yeah. So Daniele, would you mind please present the help desk activity? And okay, thank you, Vlado, for the presentation if I was not heard before.
Yeah, thank you, Robert. My presentation will be short. I think here is a kind of workflow that we started using during our help desk assessment that started on the beginning of May. We decided to start with the issue that were in status new from the 1st of January 2019. New meaning that nobody from our team started having a look at the issue. So the first thing that we did is to have a list of these kind of issues, and we did an assessment. Some of them, of course, were not valid anymore. because, for example, they were addressed while addressing other issues. And so in this case, we sent a check to the author to check if the issue can be really closed. And sometimes you correctly close directly on the issue tracker the issue. In other cases, of course, the issue has to be addressed more, let's say. And so in this case, or in the case that we noticed that the issue should have been addressed by us, then we marked this issue as so. The next slide will have a bit of statistics on the numbers that we have on the help desk, always starting from the beginning of January 2019. As you can see, there are 434 issues that are, this is the total number of issues that we got on the Geoportal help desk, meaning the open one and the already closed one. There are a considerable number of issues that has already been taken in consideration, but are still in the status feedback, so they may need some further investigation from our side or from both sides. We also decided to put this number, the issues open from the 15th of December 2019, meaning from the start of the monitoring and reporting exercise, that are 118. Then our assessment started in May, is concentrating more, as I said, on the issue in status new, that are 60 or around 60. And during our assessment, we already closed 20 of them. And you close after our check has been sent 22. And then we identified 8 issues that has to be addressed by us, and 10 that needs some further discussion on the at our level. I think that it is important if you receive this notification that we sent to you, if you can please check if the issue is still valid for you or not. I mean, if we can close it, in this way we can move on our process and our assessment of the different issues. I think that's it on my side. Robert, if you want to add something, I hand over to you the presentation.
Thank you, Daniele. I think it has to be said here that during the processing and calculation of processing of data and calculation of indicator, we lower the activity on the help desk. Not that we were not reading your issues, but we only selected those that we thought had a big impact on the process of monitoring and calculation. So I think we communicated that to you as well with the apology, and we also promised to come back to the issues that you send it to us to after the process, and this is exactly what Daniele was presenting. So we are currently really trying to assess all the issues that we received, which of those are closed. So first we need your input there, that if the issue is closed, then please confirm that. That's really important. And second, and also importantly, it is that please send us the issue only in case you have the evidence that there is an issue. So what I mean by this is that we will now, from now on, we will really promote the use of the validator. So we really would like you to first go to the validator to validate your resources, and only in case you have everything passed there, and then you initiate harvesting in the Geoportal, and then you find there you will have some issues. This is exactly the moment to report the issue, and ideally with a precise documentation of the problem. That will help us to cope with your issues in a more, let's say, speedy manner. Okay. So this is just a kind of a context of this presentation of the help desk. Okay, now we continue with the little bit of outlook for Geoportal and the planning for the monitoring 2020. Okay, so regarding the monitoring 2020, so as I said just now, please use the reference validator as well as the linkage checker before you initiate the harvesting. So this is really the very strong recommendation from our side. Then the tool for bulk validation will be shortly provided, as we already communicated. So we expect within 2 weeks that you will be able to access the scripts and you will be able to use it yourself. The script will also include the calculation of the indicators MDI 1112 for the endpoint that is being validated. So you will have the tool to, let's say, to monitor throughout the year the value of these two indicators. Okay, and if you add those two indicators to the already integrated indicators that we already have in the harvesting process, you have the full list of indicators that you can check throughout the year to monitor how you are doing with in terms of the monitoring exercise and the indicators. Okay, so I think this is very important that we have introduced that let's say permanent monitoring of the progress through the calculation of the indicators. We are not able to integrate directly those two indicators inside the harvesting process because that would really kill the system. So that's why we are really promoting to install your local instance of the validator and use the scripts that we will provide you to validate your endpoints directly in your site and calculate the respective indicator. Regarding the harvesting of the large catalogs, currently, you know, it will remain on request, so we will not basically allow those 5 countries to initiate the harvesting due to the basically processing reason. So at this moment, this is not possible, and therefore we will still request on you to ask or to provide us information that you would like us to initiate the harvesting. At the same time, we have started a deeper look in our backend of Geoportal, and regarding the discussion what to harvest exactly, what to store, and what to archive. Because you know that the whole backend of the Geoportal originally was developed as a validator in a way, and therefore we are storing a lot of representations of your data, including the data sets itself that are being provided through services. And that creates a huge overload in terms of the processing time and in terms of of course, storage. So currently, for instance, the full harvest and processing of German catalog creates something like 1 terabyte of data. And that is exactly why everything takes so long. So we are discussing now these aspects, and we will come up hopefully soon with the simplification and maybe with the process that will be much faster, especially for those 5 catalogs where the speed is really very slow. Okay. Now regarding the Geoportal, because of the let's say the human resources limitation on our side, we had to park a lot of activities that we have started, and so we would like to come back to those, and we have already started with some of those. And here is basically the list of activities that we would like to come back to. So first, we would like to finish the adaptation of the system in a kind of a testing regime for the simplification option that we agreed. Okay, so as you know, there is an action on simplification of data service linking using the resource locator metadata element of the data sets as the only source for the linking of the resources. And we agreed with the little team on the encoding. So we have the harmonized encodings, including the code lists. The only problem was that we haven't adapted the backend of the Geoportal to test it. So I think this is something that we should continue. Then we would like to extend the system to also be able to to process the other type of download services, including the new OGC API features one. Then we would like to continue and hopefully soon find a solution for distinguishing the protected services from not protected services, harmonize data sets from as-is data sets. So I think these are the two, let's say, filters that are really needed also from the user perspective. So this is something very important to let's say continue and finish as soon as possible. And then last but not least, something that I was particularly, really interested in and let's say excited about, and that is the feature type viewer to facilitate the search through your resources using the individual feature types. And that let's say we parked at the level of alpha or the prototype, and I think that we should continue with that. Then, of course, all these backend related activities should be then reflected in the front end. And last but not least, we are now embarking on the, let's say, integration of the feedback platforms that we have in the overall Inspire. So to provide, let's say, better integrated feedback to you and clearly distinguish things like a concrete issue, concrete documented technical bugs from the more generic questions and suggestions and recommendations, for instance. Okay, so and last information, as a one way of solving the, let's say, the issue of, let's say, very resource intensive maintenance of the backend of the Geoportal and very difficult way of upgrading it into extending it, etc. We also started to discuss and investigate the option of replacing the backend of the Geoportal, or at least some of its parts, by the open source software. And in this case, in April, we have done a little feasibility study and investigation, which, together with the GeoCat experts, on on the possible use of GeoNetwork. And we have received a very positive results. And for sure, we will continue in the second phase of this investigation, which could end up with a prototype of the Geoportal backend, maybe partly frontend as well, based on the new upcoming GeoNetwork version 4 software. Of course, that this is a strategic activity that we started, and of course it could help us to sustain the solution, also to utilize the open source community with possible technical solutions and solving the bugs, as well as we know that many of many of the endpoints, many of the national catalogs are using that software. So naturally, the interaction between the national catalogs and the European one should be, or will be, or would be easier. And so that was the little outlook on the monitoring and Geoportal activities upcoming. And then now let me finish with the results of the survey. So we kindly ask you at the beginning of May to provide us a feedback on the monitoring 2019. We saw that it would be a good way of let's say getting a consolidated feedback from you. The survey was closed on the 22nd of May, and we have received the responses from 19 countries. So I think out of 32 that we have in our catalog, in our portal, I think it's not bad. What we can say that if there is still um, a need, or if you want to still provide us your feedback and you haven't done it, so we can open the survey and you can provide it. So, but that will depend on your, if you want. So maybe if you can put in the text box whether you would like still to provide the feedback on the monitoring, and based on that feedback we will decide to open it and to get that feedback from you. So based on that short survey, basically here are the results. So the first question was about the whether the calculated indicators were reflecting your expectations, and as you can see, basically that the slightly over the half of the responses were that they were reflecting the expectations, and roughly 40% that the results were below the expectations. In case the calculations were below the expectations, we asked the questions. Okay, so what do you think are the reasons for those low numbers? And basically, this is the summary of the responses. So I think the major one is that until recently the metadata validation was done with the 70% threshold. So if you had errors with those elements that goes beyond 70% of the total number of the elements, then the metadata was considered as valid. And of course that with the new decision on monitoring and reporting, there is no such a tolerance bar anymore. So it's either correct or not. So of course that is basically the biggest factor of the low number of conformity. There are still some technical issues on the side of harvesting of the catalogs. Then I think that the major response was around the lack of time, resources, and know-how at the national level. Okay. Then also common answer was that still high complexity of data service linking, the lack of automated procedure, especially for the linkage checker. And then there was a response regarding the difficulties to use the Inspire reference validator. So you heard from Marco that there will be a new user interface soon coming for the validator, and also that we will provide you with a custom or the tailored set of ETSs for the next monitoring 2020. So there will be a package that for you that prepared to run in order to see the results that will be requested by the monitoring 2020, for instance, as well as the bulk validation software that we also mentioned before. Now, regarding the question about what are you going to do about it? So, what are the major plans and investments to improve the situation on your side? I think that the majority replied in a way that you are really planning to move to version 2.0 regarding the metadata. You would like also to increase the consistency between linkages. So I think that we were all very pleased to see these results, that really the linkages between the resources and moving to version 2.0, I think really is these are the priorities that we would really recommend to follow. Of course, then we have the conformity of data sets and increase availability of data sets, especially for priority data sets. Okay, and last but not least, do not underestimate the stability of your systems, and especially the stability of the services that are serving the data. I think it is really something coming from the user perspective, which should be taken more and more on board, that if you are claiming that there is a data set that is available, etc., please make sure that the services that are delivering these data are up and running. Okay, here was the question about the usefulness of the documentations that we provided to you, and as Marco already showed, I think that overall you found them very useful. So we are happy for that. Of course, we could have done better. There were some suggestions in the next question about even improving the documentation, but of course that we would love to, but at the same time, the limitation on the resources on our side is really a very strong factor here. Here is the that we ask basically follow up the recommendation on using the reference validator and the linking checker before you initiate harvesting to the European Geoportal. So basically, we ask whether you are planning to do that. And again, we are very pleased to see that almost 90% of the responses were in that direction. So this is really something that we are happy about, and this really should be supported. Okay, and this is the last slide regarding the survey. That these are your suggestions for improving the monitoring process. We try to aggregate your feedback, which is very valuable and really is taken into account. So first, about the organizational things. So be more transparent about the roadmap for the development of the tools, Geoportal Validator. Provide the information in advance, and in advance meaning in advance of the next monitoring cycle. And as Marco said, this has happened already for the validator, and we are planning to do the same for the Geoportal. So we will try to, let's say, synchronize with the validator so that there will be no major changes after the certain deadline to give you the time and stability for for your job to do. To improve support and communication, well, we of course we will try to integrate these feedback platforms. We are providing you with the tools as we can, but of course there will always remain some job on your side. So please do not use us as a cheap, let's say, service providers or metadata creators. So this we cannot do, despite we would love to, of course. Okay, some technical aspects that you mentioned. So alignment of checks made by Geoportal and reference validator. Yes, we've been working on it very hard throughout the monitoring exercise and also before. In case you will still find some discrepancies, please, report it to us. This is very important. So yes, we signed to this one for sure. Then regular provision of automated calculation of indicators for each harvest, and move the calculation of the MDI 1112 in the harvesting. Well, as I explained before, this is not possible due to the processing intensity and the possible issues that we will quickly run into. So what we have found a solution that the scripts that we will share with you on the bulk use of the validator, they will also include the calculation of those indicators. So depending on where you install the instance of the validator and for which purposes you will be using it, the calculation of the indicators will reflect it. So if it is at the level of the individual data provider, the indicators will reflect the conformity of the metadata of that provider. If you install it at the level of the country, then that will reflect basically the country indicators on the conformity of metadata. Okay, so switching to metadata to 0 and or better distinction between 1.3 and 2.0. We are not going to recommend a use of the additional metadata element to distinguish between the versions, as we received from some of you. we really strongly recommend to move to version 2.0. Full stop. Improve the supplementary material for the validation. I think we cannot go beyond what we've done so far. So really, we cannot help you much with there. What we will do, and that was also your feedback. Shortly, we will provide you with the list of the concrete metadata elements that are used for calculation of indicators. So to be very transparent, which metadata elements are used for each indicator for the calculation. I think that will, let's say, improve also the transparency of how the indicators are being calculated. Make the harvesting process faster. Yes, we are working on it, as I said before, either by switching to the open source or by really limiting the number of data and files that we are storing on our site. That will improve the speed for sure. Yeah, the availability of source code document or algorithms, I already mentioned that yes, we will provide some of it, and the provision of the automated procedure for the linkage checker. This one is well, that's a bigger task, and I think I will leave it open. Of course, ideally, it will be perfect if the linkage checker is a part of the reference validator test. But at this moment, the contractors were not informed about that. So as I said, it's a longer task that I will leave it open for the time being. And I think with that, I would like to thank you, and hopefully we still might have some time. What is the time? Yeah, we still might have some time for some burning questions. So I see that there were several questions in the text box now. Maybe, I don't know, Marco or Vlado, you follow the text box. Can you maybe reflect on some of the questions that we received?
Yes, Robert, I want just to mention that there were some requests from other countries to be able to fill the survey that we shared. So I have already reopened the survey, and someone also asked until when it will be open. I would propose to keep it open for some weeks, maybe until the end of June. Of course, our recommendation is to provide your answers as soon as possible, because we will also use them for the technical report. So don't wait until end of June. That's our recommendation.
Very good.
Then there was also a very useful, I think, message by Antonio Rotundo. Maybe, Antonio, you want to say something about this software you shared to convert automatically metadata from version 1.3 to 2.0. If you want to say something more, I think this would be very, very useful to everyone.
Hi everyone, do you hear me?
Yes.
We developed a reusable tool. We named metadata converter that can be reused for the transformation of metadata from the TG 1.3 to TG 2.0. Basically, the transformation is refers to the national profile, but as it is based on an XSLT script, it can be adapted to other national profiles, and in the repository we provided also an XSLT script for strictly based on Inspire TG 2.0 that can be improved after your test or after the test we are making. Any feedback will be welcome to improve this tool. The tool makes get records request to CSW based on 3 parameters. Start position, max records, and we decided to use organization name to support and to make to support the public administration to transform its own metadata, but the request can be adapted using other queryable and other comparison operators in the request. And the output is a compressed folder that includes the old get records response, so based on TG 1.3. The new the get records response based on the new guidelines TG 2.0, so transformed through the XSLT script, and the individual metadata records transformed. And this is the way how the tool works. Again, any feedback to improve the solution will be welcome. Thanks.
Antonio, thank you very much for this. My recommendation would be if you can summarize this approach in a little one pager, and share it with with the group. I think that would be very useful.
Yeah.
Including the scripts.
Yeah.
Okay.
I put the URL or the URL of the repository in the chat.
Okay, perfect.
But I send you an email to summarize how the solution works.
Okay. Any other question from the audience?
It's Marco again. On the same topic, Ine rightly pointed out the fact that also GeoNetwork has implemented a transformation from TG 1.3 to 2.0. So this is another useful resource to look at.
And I think that also EA colleagues, they have also, I think, already experience with the this transformation. So I think that I don't know whether it's linked to the GeoNetwork work, but I remember that Jose was also sharing this information a couple of weeks ago.
Absolutely, Robert. Jose is not in the meeting anymore, I think, but that is the case.
Okay, thank you, Stefan.
A couple of other questions from the chat. The first is whether we are sharing the slides afterwards. Of course, yes, we will. And another one was more for the help desk team. It looks like someone is not receiving notifications by email when an issue in the help desk is updated. So we have to look into that. I am personally receiving that notifications on the issues where I participated, of course. So we will look into that.
Yeah, Marco, if I can add something. If I can add something on that, it's true somebody is receiving mail, some others not. Maybe what I can suggest is to check your settings on your profile, and then if you are still not getting the mails, then you can get back to us and we will check.
Okay. Any other question you would like to ask about the outlook, about the process, about the upcoming exercise? As I said at the beginning of the workshop, of course that it would have been much better to organize a workshop for 2 days, really to share this experience that we have gathered together. and then to share the best way for the future. But unfortunately, at this moment, it is not possible. But let's hope that it will be a possibility in the coming weeks or months. Okay, so if there is no any question, comments, then I think I would like to stress once again that it was a transition year. So despite the numbers are not really excellent, we have to see that as a transition. We know that there have been some technical issues that really influence the numbers, like in the case of Spain, for instance, where they implemented a national security licensing for HTTPS, which was not accepted by the systems that we are running, and therefore the numbers were lower because of that. And there were maybe others. So all these things should be much more clear now, and so there is a big perspective, positive perspective for the next year exercise. And I think that with this, I would like to finish. Also, a little personal note at the end. As some of you know, I have finished my contract at JRC actually on a Friday last week. So I'm leaving the Inspire team, unfortunately, because it's been a very, let's say, fruitful and very interesting experience, working experience, and also personal experience on my side. But at the same time, I'm really very positive and hopeful that that Marco and the whole team will be able to to maintain and work with you on the improvement of the Inspire infrastructure. So with that, I would like to finish the workshop, and please continue with other workshops that we have prepared in this Inspire online conference. And as Marco said, next week there is a reference validator workshop that is dedicated to the more technical, let's say, discussions and presentation of the validator. Okay, have a nice day. Bye bye.
Bye bye. Thank you.
Bye bye. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye bye.
Bye.